The Cathar were not creators, they were inheritors. A species of bipeds from a dust-choked world, anatomically not unlike the creatures they would one day find on Earth. They had risen to prominence on stolen wings. The technology they found in the ruins of a long-dead civilization allowed them to tear open the fabric of space-time, creating shimmering, unstable passages to other worlds. They called them worm gates. They were not explorers, they were locusts. For centuries they swarmed through the galaxy, a tide of gray-skinned warriors in black composite armor. They would arrive unannounced, deploy their atmospheric harvesters, subjugate or eradicate the locals, and move on, leaving a husk in their wake. Their empire was a string of pearls, each pearl a conquered world. Then came the signal. It was ancient, degraded, a whisper on the interstellar winds, a simple, mathematically elegant sequence of pulses originating from a small, yellow sun system in an unfashionable spiral arm of the galaxy. It was a greeting card, billions of miles and millennia out of date. To High Commander Xylos of the Cathar Imperium, it was an invitation to dinner. He dispatched a single Voidstalker-class reconnaissance vessel, the Unblinking Eye, with a skeleton crew of 50 of his finest legionaries. It was a formality. Their task: assess the planet's technological level, catalog its resources, and designate landing zones for the main invasion fleet. The planet was designated Sol 3. The natives, according to the faint radio chatter they could now intercept, called it Earth. The problems began as soon as the Unblinking Eye kissed the upper atmosphere. Earth's magnetic field was a chaotic, violent storm that their simulations had utterly failed to predict. Consoles sparked and alarms shrieked a symphony of failure. The ship's Wormgate core, the very heart of their power, began to destabilize. Atmospheric entry failed. We are losing containment. The pilot screamed over the intercom. Legion Captain Kalen, his scarred gray face grim, made the call. Abandon ship, all hands to the life pods. Rendezvous at designated coordinates post-landing. For the Imperium, 4 life pods, each a hardened tungsten dart, ejected from the tumbling, burning wreck of the Unblinking Eye. 3 groups of the galaxy's most feared conquerors, plummeting toward a world they thought was a primitive jewel ripe for the taking. They were about to learn that Earth was a jewel that bit back. Pod Gamma, Siberia. The pod slammed into the side of a mountain with a deafening groan of stressed metal. The 7 legionaries within, commanded by Sub-Commander Torvin, stumbled out into a world of blinding white and biting cold. The wind howled like a tortured animal across the desolate slope. Their suit thermoregulators, designed for the vacuum of space or the controlled climates of conquered cities, strained against the brutal, unrelenting frost. Comms are down, a technician reported, his breath misting. Can't reach the other pods, the atmospheric interference is... He shuddered, and it wasn't from the cold. It's wrong. Unnatural. They found shelter behind a rocky outcropping. As the weak sun bled away, an oppressive silence fell, broken only by the wind. But it wasn't just silence. It was an absence of everything. No birds, no animals, nothing. Then the infrasound began. A low, pervasive hum that vibrated not in their ears, but deep within their skulls. It was a frequency that frayed the nerves, that turned discipline into paranoia. Legionaries who had faced down armed rebellions now eyed each other with suspicion. That night, the screaming started. One of the soldiers, a veteran of a dozen campaigns, clawed at his helmet, yelling about orange spheres dancing in the snow. He tore his suit open, exposing his gray skin to the lethal cold, and stumbled out into the blizzard, never to be seen again. Another began whispering to himself, convinced his comrades were shape-shifting natives sent to trick him. Torvin had to stun him with his sidearm. By the 3rd day, Torvin was alone. The others were gone. 1 had fled. 2 had killed each other in a paranoid rage. The rest had simply vanished from their shelter in the night. Torvin made a final desperate log entry on his datapad. He wrote of the oppressive feeling of being watched by something ancient and unseen, something in the very rock and ice of the mountain. His last act was to crawl out into the snow, away from the pod, away from the maddening hum, seeking a peace he would only find in death. His body would be found months later by human trappers, frozen solid, his face a mask of profound, inexplicable terror. The local Nenets people, when they heard the news, would nod grimly. They knew the legends of this place, of the strange lights and the madness it induced. They knew why one should never venture up the slopes of Kholat Shakal, the place the newcomers called the Dyatlov Pass. Pod Beta, Central Africa Legion Captain Kalen's pod had a much softer landing, crashing through a canopy of lush green into the sweltering heat of a jungle clearing. The air was thick, wet, and vibrantly, aggressively alive. The 16 Cathar legionaries emerged, their plasma rifles at the ready, into a world of overwhelming sensory input. The buzz of insects was a constant roar. The smells were of damp earth, sweet decay, and strange, pungent blossoms. Their arrogance remained intact. Primitive, Kalen grunted, surveying the scene. Disgusting, catalog the fauna. Assess for threats. The first lesson came swiftly. 2 legionaries, scouting the perimeter, stumbled upon a herd of enormous, gray-skinned quadrupeds with thick, armored hides and a single, formidable horn on their snouts. A rhinoceros, their databank weakly suggested. Deeming it a potential food source, they fired a low-power plasma bolt at its flank. The creature, enraged rather than wounded, charged. Its horn punched through the first legionary's composite armor like it was paper. Its sheer mass trampled the other into the mud before he could even raise his weapon. The second lesson came at dusk. From the tall grasses surrounding their makeshift camp, 2 large, tawny predators emerged. Lions. The Cathar formed a defensive circle, their rifles glowing. But the lions were not soldiers, they were ambush hunters. They didn't attack the line. They were a feint. While the legionaries focused on the 2 males, a pack of lionesses burst from the opposite side of the clearing. The disciplined Cathar formation broke into chaos. In the frenzy of teeth and claws, 4 more fell. The final lesson was the cruelest. By the next day, the survivors, terrified and demoralized, tried to reach higher ground. They came to a wide, muddy river. Kalen sent a soldier named Vash to test the depth. Vash waded in, his rifle held high. He was halfway across when the water erupted. A log, no, not a log. A monstrous reptile with a jaw powerful enough to crush tungsten latched onto his leg and dragged him under in a terrifying death roll. The water turned red for a moment and then was still. Kalen stood on the riverbank looking at his remaining few soldiers. They were conquerors of worlds. They had technology that could level cities. But here in this primordial land, their technology meant nothing. They were just meat, slow, soft meat in a world of tooth and claw. They were no longer hunters. They were merely prey. Then the laughter began. It started as a single whooping cackle from the shadows, a sound of pure mania that made the Cathar's skin crawl. Another voice joined it, then another, until the night was filled with a chorus of unnerving, hysterical laughter. Glowing eyes like embers in the dark materialized in the gloom, circling their position. A pack of spotted hyenas, their powerful shoulders hunched, slunk into view, their jaws dripping saliva. There was no strategy left, no defiance. There was only terror. The pack surged forward. The Cathar fired their rifles wildly into the darkness, the plasma bolts illuminating flashes of teeth and fur. But for every one that fell, 3 more seemed to take its place. They were overwhelmed in a flurry of snapping jaws and overwhelming numbers, pulled down one by one. Kalen's last act was to fire a final, desperate shot before he was buried under the weight of the cackling, merciless pack. Pod Delta. The Amazon Pod Delta carried only 5 legionaries, the smallest crew. It plunged deep into a canopy so thick that the sky vanished entirely, crashing into the damp, dark undergrowth of the Amazon rainforest. The air was a suffocating blanket of humidity, thick with the smell of rot and life, and the noise was a deafening billion-voiced choir of insects, birds, and unseen things. "Report!" ordered the squad leader, her voice tight. The 5 of them stood back to back, their rifle lights cutting feeble cones into the oppressive gloom. Their first loss was silent. The legionary watching their rear flank simply vanished. There was a soft rustle of leaves, a choked gasp, and then nothing. They found only his rifle lying in the mud, and a set of massive paw prints that seemed to melt back into the jungle. They never saw the jaguar that had taken him. Panic began to set in. They decided to follow a stream, hoping it would lead to more open ground. As they waded through the murky, knee-deep water, one soldier screamed. Something immense and powerful had wrapped around his legs. An anaconda thicker than his own torso was coiled around him, its muscles contracting with inexorable force. They fired their rifles at it, but the massive reptile was a thrashing whirlwind of violence. It pulled their comrade under the brown water, crushing the life from him as he disappeared from sight. Now only 3 remained. Scrambling onto the muddy bank, they fled blindly through the jungle. One of them, exhausted, stumbled and put his hand on a brightly colored tree trunk to steady himself. He didn't see the tiny jewel-like frog, a brilliant splash of yellow and black, sitting on the bark. He felt a tiny prick on his palm. He looked at his hand, confused, then his eyes widened. A tremor started in his arm, and within a minute he was convulsing on the ground, foam frothing from his mouth as his own nervous system betrayed him. The other two could only watch in horror as he died from the touch of a creature no bigger than his thumb. The final two Cathar were broken. They were lost, surrounded by a vertical prison of trees and stalked by horrors both great and small. The second-to-last survivor was bitten by a small, unassuming snake while he slept. The last legionary was left utterly alone, his mind unraveling in the claustrophobic darkness, his own terrified breathing the only sound he could trust until, inevitably, the jungle claimed him two-pod alpha. Alaska, the last pod, carrying 12 legionaries, smashed into the rocky coast of a large, mist-shrouded island. The air was cold, clean, and smelled of salt and pine. Towering trees formed a wall of green and brown before them. This was Kodiak Island. Their initial assessment was one of relief. The cold was manageable. There were no strange, mind-bending frequencies. They set up a defensive perimeter and began repairs on the pod's long-range communicator. Their first encounter with the local apex predators came when a massive, brown-furred beast ambled into their clearing. A Kodiak bear. It was huge, larger than any land predator they had ever documented, but it seemed clumsy. One of the legionaries laughed. "Look at it, stupid animal." He raised his rifle and fired a sonic pulse at it, meant to scare it away. The high-frequency sound didn't scare the bear. It tore a roar of agony and rage from its throat, but the roar didn't end. It was answered. From the dense tree line, two more massive shapes emerged, drawn by the cry of the first, a tide of brown fur and claws. The legionaries' amusement vanished, replaced by a cold dread. They weren't facing a single beast. They were facing a force of nature. The three bears hit their line like a wave of pure destruction. Plasma bolts, which could punch through ship hulls, sizzled against thick hide and muscle, but they didn't stop the charge. The first bear swatted a legionary aside, his armor crumpling like foil. The other two plowed into the panicked formation. A swipe of a colossal paw, armed with claws like daggers, tore one soldier nearly in half. Another's rifle was ripped from his hands before a set of jaws closed on his helmet with a sickening crunch of metal and bone. The Cathar were warriors, but they were trained for ranged combat, for tactical supremacy. They had no answer for this kind of raw, unstoppable fury. Their battle was over in less than a minute. It wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. The last surviving Cathar scrambled back into the pod. Blood splattered across his visor. He managed to seal the door just as the bears slammed their immense weight against it, denting the hull. He frantically tried to activate the distress beacon. As the enraged roars of three behemoths and the sound of claws scraping and tearing at the metal filled the small space, he managed to send one single garbled data burst before the beasts, with impossible strength, ripped the hatch from its hinges. Epilogue miles away and light years from home, the Cathar Imperium received the final garbled data bursts. 5 fragmented hymns of terror from 5 different hells. From one came the sound of a maddening hum and paranoid screams. From another, a single world-shaking roar and the sound of rending metal. A third carried the manic laughter of scavengers. A fourth held only the silent, suffocating terror of the jungle. And the fifth, the last and most terrifying, contained the sounds of sophisticated plasma fire having no effect, and a single coherent telepathic message that burned itself into the minds of the listening psychers. A low, ancient, mocking voice, followed by the choked, disbelieving cry of their best commander, "It does not die." The conquerors had found their new world. The invasion of Earth was canceled. Some places were not meant to be conquered. They were meant to be feared. Epsilon, Transylvania, the largest surviving pod, carrying 12 legionaries under the command of the grim tactician Vorlag, crashed deep within a forest of towering skeletal trees. Their databanks identified the location as the Transylvanian Alps, a rugged spine of mountains on a world designated Epsilon. A jagged moon hung in the sky, illuminating the crumbling silhouette of a ruined castle on a distant peak. "We have the benefit of the other pod's failures," Vorlag stated, his voice a low growl. "Their threat assessments for this world were incomplete. We will not make the same mistake." Fortify the position. Full sensor sweep. The first contacts were biological and manageable. Wolves, a pack larger and more intelligent than their databases suggested, but still flesh and blood. They descended on the crash site, and the Cathar met them with disciplined plasma fire. They lost one legionary, his throat torn out in the chaos, but they incinerated a dozen of the beasts, their triumphant cries echoing in the cold night. Their victory was short-lived. As the twin moons of this system arced across the sky, the true master of the forest revealed itself. It was not a pack that came for them, but a single entity. It was a horror, a bipedal titan of fur and rage that stood 3 times the height of a legionary, blending wolf and Cathar-like anatomy into a gargantuan form. It moved with a speed that defied its bulk, its roar tearing through the air like a thunderclap. Vorlag watched in disbelief as a plasma bolt that should have vaporized a light tank merely blew a chunk of flesh from the creature's shoulder, only for the wound to steam and seal itself shut in seconds. The single werewolf was a whirlwind of destruction. It shattered their perimeter in one charge, its claws thick as swords shredding composite armor and bone alike. The 12 legionaries became 7, then 4, their disciplined tactics useless against a singular regenerating engine of fury. "Fall back!" Vorlag roared, his tactical mind a ruin of terror and disbelief. "To the high ground! To the ruins!" The last 3 survivors, Vorlag, his science officer, and a single trembling legionary, scrambled up the rocky path to the castle they had seen earlier. They sealed a massive iron-bound door behind them and found themselves in a vast, dust-choked hall. "It doesn't make sense," the science officer whispered, looking at his datapad. "Its biology is a violation of physics. And there's something else. A single life sign in this structure. But it's cold, registering on thermal as a void." A low, cultured voice echoed from the shadows of the hall, speaking not in their tongue, but directly inside their minds, a violation that was more terrifying than any physical threat. "Warriors, you have come so far only to die in my home." A figure stepped from behind a massive stone pillar. He appeared Cathar-like in silhouette, but moved with a liquid grace that was utterly inhuman. His face was pale and aristocratic, his eyes glowing with ancient predatory intelligence. Vorlag raised his plasma rifle. "What are you?" The figure smiled, revealing sharpened canines. His voice flooded their minds, bringing with it the scent of old blood and cold stone, accompanied by visions of burning villages and forests of impaled men. "I was once a man, a prince of this land when your ancestors were still learning to shape metal. My name was Vlad Dracula. The world your databanks have forgotten knew me as the Impaler. I stood against empires that sought to devour my home, and I taught them fear with fire and stake." The telepathic onslaught continued, a torrent of history and malice. My thirst to repel all invaders, to spill the blood of my enemies, was so absolute that it echoed beyond my mortal death. This ancient land answered that call. It gave me the power to continue my vigil. To fight the monsters that came for my people, I became the greatest monster of all. He gestured dismissively towards the forest. "That beast which shattered your legion? A mere hound at my gate. What hope did you have against its master?" He moved. He didn't run. He simply wasn't where he had been a moment ago, now standing directly in front of the young legionary. Before anyone could react, the soldier let out a choked gasp and was lifted into the air, impaled on the figure's impossibly strong arm. The science officer began screaming, firing his rifle wildly. The plasma bolt sizzled through the figure, leaving no mark. The being, Vlad the Impaler, now Dracula, tossed the dead Cathar aside and turned his attention to him, his eyes filled with a bored cruelty. Vorlag's last transmission to the void was a single choked burst of pure terror. "It's a king, a ghost from their history. It does not die. It does not." Epilogue miles away and light years from home, the Cathar Imperium received the final garbled data bursts. 5 fragmented hymns of terror from 5 different hells. From one came the sound of a maddening hum and paranoid screams. From another, a single world-shaking roar and the sound of rending metal. A third carried the manic laughter of scavengers. A fourth held only the silent, suffocating terror of the jungle. And the fifth, the last and most terrifying, contained the sounds of sophisticated plasma fire having no effect, and a single, coherent, telepathic message that burned itself into the minds of the listening psychers. A low, ancient, mocking voice, followed by the choked, disbelieving cry of their best commander, "It does not die." The conquerors had found their new world. The invasion of Earth was cancelled. Some places were not meant to be conquered, they were meant to be feared.